All right, this last section is about 3 really important questions to understand if your model is scalable. Pretty simple, but they're actually quite nuanced. The first is your model applicable enough? In other words, are there enough places, settings, where your model will work that it actually has the scope for scale? The other is, now that you know who your doer is it simple enough that your doer could do it? The final is, now that you've identified a payer, is it cheap enough that the payer would pay it? A yes to all 3 of those means you've got something scalable. Is your model adaptable enough, and could it be adapted to enough places that it has the scope for scale? You know, for example, that Blue Ventures, what their model needs is artisanal coastal fisheries with a rapidly reproducing species to do that demonstration with. And our question was, is this only going to work there? Where do you have those conditions where you could use this model? Turns out there's lots of them. There's a lifetime's worth of scaling that up. This is, of course, a thought exercise, but you actually need a working knowledge of your doers. In other words, if you say, our doer is lots of NGOs, but you actually don't know much about the NGO world, well, you're making a very naive guess. You need to run your idea by a bunch of people who actually know the NGO world, and they can say, no, not in a million years could they do that, or yeah, I think that's really workable. For the first time, I've actually confronted the idea that somebody other than me might need to do this at scale. And then I realized, I don't know if NGOs scale could do this. And it's so important that you ask that question, do I really know that NGOs could do this? Because if you just blithely sail ahead saying, oh, lots of NGOs, awesome, I now have an answer. And it turns out, no, your idea is too complicated. NGOs won't do a good enough job on it. They'll cut corners. They'll balk at doing it at all. You know, it ain't gonna work. That dog won't hunt. There's a useful frame is that everybody's got a price point. So a government has a certain amount of money they want to spend to get a kid educated. A government has a certain amount, Ministry of Health has a certain amount they want to spend per community health worker. A customer has a price point for that product that you wanted to build a business around. What is your payer's price point, and can you meet it? This is often their toughest step because they don't even know how to calculate costs. The first step of this is just kind of a rough approximation and saying, you know, admitting that what you have to do has to be simple and cheap. And kind of a ballpark guess at whether this is like a reasonable amount based on your best informed guess as to what that government's willing to pay for community health workers. You could do this. You could look at people who are doing something similar, see what their cost is, and see what governments are actually paying currently per community health worker, and you can take those 2 things and start triangulating. But knowing that you've got a design toward a price point is hugely useful for people. They rarely do it. They might design for affordability, they might design in a general sense that yes, this has to work in low resource settings, but they actually need to find a price point to design toward.
Let's do a quick audit of the scalability of the Inyanyeri cook stove. First, is it big enough? Yes, there are millions of people who want and need clean cook stoves. Is it simple enough for the customer? For Inyanyeri, absolutely. They get the stove for free, and it's a really simple contract to get fuel over time. And lastly, is it cheap enough? Absolutely. The stoves themselves are free, and the fuel is a little less expensive than the coal the customers used to buy.
It may be that you realize, you know, I have a really simple model. It's realistic for me to imagine that government might do this. What I've really got to figure out is what it costs and what they're willing to pay. That's my new priority.
One thing Mulago are really big on is don't scale unless you're sure it's going to actually work. So we're talking about scale, we're talking about the big end of town, but you're going to start with like some research and development, and then a proof of concept, some kind of pilot, and then you're going to get other people to replicate your work to prove that it actually happens. And then you might do a great big expensive like randomized controlled trial. And then with all of the funders in the room and proof that it really truly works, then you scale. That's the thing we're excited about. That's the thing we're building for. But all of the work you do next week is going to start down the small end of town.
It's continually refined. It's never perfect. So you have to make sure that you don't petrify its development in things like fixed 5-year work plans. Everything is about being able to let this thing evolve. Take your best guess and then start digging in with the literature and with informed people and with good examples, and start iterating on it. What I believe in most and what I respect most is the fact that you have decided to throw yourself into this. So this is a tool to help you do that. And it comes from a place of real respect. I wouldn't engage you if I didn't respect utterly what you've set out to do. And I want to see you succeed.